Okay, folks, next up on the docket is my favorite part of each and every week that I have done it so far. It is episode 4 of Reload, Retool, and Rebuild. For those of you who have not seen the first 3 episodes, go and check those out on my channel right now. But for those of you who have not seen it and just kind of want to jump in, at episode 4 here is how it works. So I take a team that I believe is not going to be in the top or in the very bottom of either one of the conferences. I try to alternate between Eastern and Western Conference, each week. Last week, for instance, I did the Clippers, and so this week I'm going to do an Eastern Conference team. So, what I do is I take one of those teams that I don't think is going to be in the top, 3 or 4 seeds in those conferences, or in the bottom 3 or 4 seeds. And I, just kind of go over their roster. I go over their pros and their cons, 3 of each for each team. And I go over their financial situation. And at the very end, I give a doctor's diagnosis as to whether at the end of the season, I believe that they should reload, retool, or rebuild. Reloading obviously means kind of bring back the same exact course, almost same exact roster, with obviously the exception of, maybe swapping a couple players in and out here and there. The best way that I can kind of look at reloading. Who is a good reloading team? I guess maybe the Lakers would be a reloading team that kind of brought the same exact team back, with just a couple of minor changes for their role players. I think that's a fair assessment. Or maybe the Thunder would be another one, kind of bringing in a free agent and trading for some guys, but keeping the same core. Either one of those would probably work. Retool, which means that you should take one of your stars or a few of your, big-time role players or whoever it may be, and you swap those out for other players. A good kind of... a good example would be maybe something like the New York Knicks this year, or the Sixers this year, or a couple of years ago, the Boston Celtics when they traded away Marcus Smart and Robert Williams for Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, bringing all those guys in. That was a retool. That was not a reload. That was a retool because, they took important players on that team and they swapped them out. Again, kind of like the New York Knicks did this year. They had, obviously Isaiah Hartenstein, Dante DiVincenzo on the team last year. They swapped those guys out for Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns, and they traded for OG Anunoby last season. So, they have a whole new look to their roster with just a couple of their core guys still left. So that would be a good example of a retool. And then, of course, we all know what rebuild is. It's blow it up, trade your stars, trade a whole bunch of guys away. Maybe you can keep 1 or 2, and you just start all over and you rebuild through the draft. So we all know what rebuild is. We all know what teams are rebuilding right now and what teams are not. So I don't think I really need to get into and explain that. So at the end of the video, I will give my diagnosis to whether I think a certain team should do one of those 3 things, and of course, the reasons as to why. This week, I am going to be talking about the Orlando Magic. Now, this one is a bit heartbreaking, honestly, for me, because I actually predicted the Orlando Magic to be a top 3 seed in the East this year. And who knows, maybe they still will somehow. But at this point, without Paolo Banchero for the rest of the season after getting injured, it does not seem very likely. And so, I am going to talk about the Orlando Magic this week. And also just because I like the Magic. I like the way they've constructed their team, so I want to talk about it. It's my channel, so deal with it. First, let's go over their roster, starting with the point guard. So, normally Jalen Suggs has been a 2 for most of his career, but this season he has played mostly the 1 and started at the 1 pretty much all season. So I'm going to list him as a 1, even though I do think he's a more natural 2. But regardless, Jalen Suggs, one of the most improved players from last year, would have been my pick to actually win most improved. Except maybe for Derek White, but that's just bias. But Jalen Suggs was excellent. I don't remember if he actually got an all-defensive nod. I think he should have if he didn't. But he was really, really excellent last year. He improved on both ends of the floor. He became a more efficient shooter, although he's still not that efficient. And he obviously became a really, really good defender last year as well. Anthony Black, a young stud that they just drafted last year, not this past draft, but the draft before. And, when they drafted him, the writing kind of seemed on the wall for Markelle Fultz, and that's exactly what happened. Markelle Fultz left in free agency. And I don't even know if Markelle Fultz is playing for anybody right now, which is crazy because he was averaging like 18 points a night or something last year, or at one point he was anyway. So, he's a good player. I'm surprised if he's not on a roster somewhere. But Anthony Black, I like a lot. Obviously, he's young. He's only 20 years old. Got plenty of time to grow. And obviously, on this team, he does have a lot of competition because you got Jalen Suggs obviously starting ahead of him, and you got Cole Anthony behind him, a guy who has really found a niche on this team. He's, a guy that can shoot it from anywhere. He's a guy that's a spark plug off the bench for them offensively when, they're kind of sputtering, which they tend to do. And then the veteran Corey Joseph to kind of get some depth if there were to be any kind of injuries, because the point guard position with Paolo down especially is the most important position on this team, because if they don't play well, then this team is not going to perform, because we kind of know what you have at each of the other positions, and especially offensively, you know what you're going to get and what you're not going to get from certain guys. So if the point guards can kind of show out and show up, this team has a chance to win games. If they don't, then they won't win games. It's that simple. And so Corey Joseph's a veteran presence, knows what to do. So if any of these guys get hurt, he is a guy that can step in and really perform well for them. One of the prizes of free agency this offseason was Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and he ends up leaving the Denver Nuggets and joining the Orlando Magic. I thought this was a really, really fun, really great signing for the Magic and for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope as well, because he's a guy that can kind of step in and be a leader, kind of step into a leadership role on this otherwise pretty young team. He's got championship experience, whereas the rest of this team does not, and so he brings a valuable piece to not only their locker room, but also to their offense. He is one of the few efficient three-point shooters that they have on this team, and so they really kind of killed two birds with one stone bringing him in. I thought he was a perfect fit. Gary Harris, a wily veteran that has kind of held on, especially in Orlando over the last handful of years. He is in his, I think he's 31 to 33 years old, somewhere in that range. You kind of know what you're getting. He's a good defender, a bit of an inefficient offensive player, but he's a leader in the locker room, and you kind of know what you're getting. Jed Howard, another guy that was drafted, not this past draft, but, the draft before. He is a guy that, he's got NBA size, he's got an NBA build. We'll see what kind of minutes he ends up getting, but I do think that he can kind of, be a part of the future if he gets enough minutes and he gets enough run. All right, in what I think is the thinnest position on the roster, especially without Paolo, it is the wings of this team. So Franz Wagner, we all know what he is and what he is not. He is a guy that is very capable of putting up 20 or more points a night, but he is also massively inefficient. This is just a guy that, is not a very good spot-up three-point shooter. He's not very efficient from the outside. His mid-range game leaves a lot to be desired. He's not the best finisher in the world. But, man, when this guy gets hot, he doesn't miss. It's really impressive to see when he can take over games. So he's got all the tools. He's got all the talent. There's a reason why he was such a high draft pick and why he is capable of being an all-star and scoring 20 or more points a night on a nightly basis. He just has not put it all together yet. And if he can really develop his finishing, if he can develop that outside shot and get up from, the 32% that he's been shooting up to even 36 or 37, like that Jason Tatum range where, you have to kind of go out there and really, guard him out there, then he could really be a dangerous weapon. And he may even be the best scorer on this team, pure scoring-wise, if he can do that, but that just hasn't happened yet. And then I'm going to kind of lump Tristan da Silva and Caleb Houston into kind of a similar category. Both young guys, both similar size, similar build. One of them is listed as a 2. Caleb Houston is kind of listed as a guard, but he's also 6'8" and 215 pounds. So I think he's got more of a a wing type body. And if you kind of look at their depth chart on Basketball Reference and on ESPN, he's more on the depth chart as a 3 and a 4 than as a 2, even though he's listed as a 2. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. So I kind of just listed him here at the 3. And then Tristan Da Silva, a guy I don't really know much about, but very similar, right? Where he's about 6'8", 6'9", about 205 to 215 pounds. He's got a very similar build, right? So both these guys, I wouldn't anticipate much of them kind of helping out this team this year, but they are there for depth purposes if more of their wings go down, because this was honestly one of the deepest positions on the team before Paolo went down, because certain teams, obviously the 3 and the 4 are very distinct, right? Like you look at, say, the Timberwolves, right, where you basically have your 3, which is Jaden McDaniels, and then you have your 4, which is Julius Randle. They do not switch. Those are the positions. And then you have Naz Reid obviously playing center, or Rudy Gobert playing center. So like all those positions are well defined. We know where they are. We know exactly what position each guy is. On this team, it's a little bit more kind of, versatile, right? Franz can play the 4. Paolo can play the 3. Isaac can play the 3 or the 4. So they're a lot more versatile between the two. So I kind of look at this team as having a total number of wings, because all of their wings can kind of play the 3 or the 4, honestly. It's not the same for every team, right? So this is one of those teams that I kind of look at that. So the wing position was one of the deepest on this roster, but without Paolo, it just looks a lot less deep, because of course it does. So yeah, that's kind of what the 3 looked like. Let's move on to the power forwards. And of course, we are looking at this team when they are fully healthy. So, Paolo Banchero is the starter. He's one of the best young players in the NBA. Again, what happened? So upsetting. I kind of thought that he was going to win Most Improved this year. That was my guess. Now, should he win Most Improved if he was already an All-Star before? No. That's not how it should work. It should go to somebody like Kobe White last year, who was irrelevant and then suddenly became a fringe all-star. Like somebody like that would have made sense. Or like it was perfect when Pascal Siakam won it a number of years ago. He was, again, irrelevant, and suddenly he was putting up 20 points a night, like overnight. So that's to me what should happen with that Most Improved award, but they have not done that oftentimes. Like last year, Tyrese Maxey winning it to me was a joke. He was averaging 20 plus points a night before he won the award. And then he put up 30 points a night, and they gave it to him. Like, no, he was already a really good NBA player before that. So it shouldn't be that way. But if you're going to use that logic, then Paolo Banchero probably would have won Most Improved if he'd have continued the way he was, because he was going to put up 30 plus points a night. He was going to, he took a huge leap in playmaking over the first few, games of the year. His rebounding has always been really good, and his defense was improving. And so this is a guy that probably would have, he would have been my pick to win Most Improved to start the year, because I kind of figured he'd take another leap scoring-wise. He'd be more efficient from the three-point range than he was last year. And if he could do that, he was going to unlock the entire floor for him. I did not anticipate him being such a good playmaker coming into the year. I think he averaged about 3 assists a game last year. And this year he was averaging somewhere around 7. So he more than doubled his assist output. It was only a few games. Of course, it could slow down, but what we were seeing looked very sustainable, and like he just was in complete control. And so, obviously him going down with a season-ending injury, really upsetting. I was really looking forward to seeing what this team was going to look like fully healthy, but unfortunately we don't get that chance. And then Jonathan Isaac signed an extension this offseason. He's making about $25 million this season, so he's a bit overpaid, but over the next few years he's making about $15 million over the next, it's about 45, I think it was 3 years, 45, so he should be making about $15 million next year, the year after that, and the year after that. So that's a lot better for Jonathan Isaac for what he gives you. He's a decent shooter, not great. Obviously, I would say he's slightly below average, or maybe right at average in terms of three-pointers and three-point percentage, but he's an excellent defender. He's very versatile. He's long. He's rangy. He can guard 1 through 5. He is very, very good, and he has been in that system for years and years and years, so he knows the system inside and out, and he is really just valuable to come off the bench, especially if somebody like Franz, who is a bit foul-prone, gets in foul trouble. Jonathan Isaac can slide right in there, and he won't carry the offense, but he can certainly help you on defense, so Again, it's a pretty thin group, only 2 guys, but they're 2 excellent players. And the big guys round this out. So the trade from to the Bulls, I think actually ended up working out for both teams, which is a very rare thing. Honestly, it feels like sometimes with trades. Vucevic has been pretty good in Chicago, although people have been wanting him to get traded for the last 3 years. But it's not necessarily because he doesn't play well. It's because he is actually pretty good, and they could get stuff for him, and people want them to rebuild. But regardless, and the Magic obviously got another good young center in Wendell Carter Jr. I think that he is really, really good. I think he's underrated. He's just a guy that I think needs to stop taking so many threes. I understand that that's where the NBA is kind of moving right now, and so you want your centers to kind of be stretch fives if they can. But, I don't know. He's not very good at it, to be honest. And this team is really inefficient at shooting threes, and so he does not help with that. So, maybe he'll be better this season. I haven't seen it so far, but maybe he will be. And then Mo Wagner, a guy that obviously is playing with his brother Franz, and so they have that connection there. He's a great backup center to have. He's a guy that is just a spark plug. It feels like every time he gets into the game, he just is very energetic, and he kind of brings up the energy on that team. Especially in the playoffs last year. I mean, he was making a lot of plays. He didn't play a ton of minutes, but in the minutes he played, he always seemed to bring it, and that's what I really like about him. The Celtics had him at one point and traded him for nothing, and that kind of made me sad, but it is what it is. And then Goga Bitadze, a guy that was a lottery pick of the Pacers a few years ago, just hasn't really found it in the NBA. Still young, though, still only 24, 25 years old, so he's still got plenty of time to grow if he can get some minutes, and so he gives them some nice depth at the center position. So that's all of the kind of main roster guys, and let's move on to the couple of kind of other players on this roster. Only 2 other contracts that I was able to dig up in the archives of the Magic's team this year. Max McClung, we kind of know Max McClung. He won the dunk contest a couple of years ago. Very athletic. That's about it, though. Doesn't really do much else. And then Trevelyan Queen, a guy I don't really know much about. So, again, this is a guy that's going to spend most of the year in the G League, I presume. So, neither of these guys I anticipate really being utilized much, especially with both of them being guards. That position is pretty well locked up. I mean, you can just take a look here. You got 4 quality point guards. So Max McClung, kind of irrelevant in that way. And then you got Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Gary Harris, and I would much prefer Jet Howard over Trevelyan Queen at this point. So you got 7 guys ahead of these guys on this roster right now that are actually going to, be important on this team. At least 5 of these guys play actual beneficial minutes. And then maybe you take Gary Harris out of there. 4 of these guys are probably playing somewhere in the range of 15 or more minutes a night. Obviously, Suggs and Pope will play more. Black and Anthony probably play around 15 to 20 a night. So, you got a lot of minutes already going to guard. So I don't really see either of these guys making too much of a push, but you never know. Injuries happen, crazy things happen, trades happen. You just never know. Okay, let's move on to 3 pros and 3 cons for the Orlando Magic. Pro number 1 is two-way versatility all across the board. This team last year was top 3 in defensive efficiency, and they are looking like they can reach those heights again, although without Paolo, it is a bit different, I would say. But regardless of what the exact number is going to end up being when they're not fully healthy this year, they are one of the youngest, most versatile rosters defensively in the entirety of the NBA, especially with Markelle Fultz kind of out of the picture now. He was really the one guy on that team that was not great at guarding on the perimeter or kind of being switchable on defense. Now you've got an entire roster of guys. Jalen Suggs, very, very good defender. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, we all know his legacy of being a good 3-and-D wing. Franz Wagner is not a great defender, but at the very least, he's got the size and the athleticism to guard 1 through 4 at the minimum. Paolo, again, he can also guard 1 through 4 on the perimeter, and Wendell Carter Jr. is one of the better perimeter defender bigs in the NBA. And so this is a team that's very, very versatile. And then off the bench, Gary Harris is another guy who can guard. Anthony Black's another guy who can guard. Obviously, I already talked about how Jonathan Isaac is a guy who's very versatile, can guard 1 through 5. This is a very versatile defensive team. And I haven't even talked about Mo Wagner and how good he is on defense either. So this is a team, their biggest strength is their defense. The reason they were so good last year despite having a bad offense is because their defense was so good. And the reason why people were afraid of them in the playoffs, even though they had a very inefficient offense, is because their defense was so good. And the reason their defense is so good is not because they have a bunch of elite defenders, because they have some elite defenders. They don't have a ton. Like, it's not like you look at the Boston Celtics and Drew Holiday, elite defender. Derek White, elite individual defender. Jaylen Brown, elite individual defender. Jason Tatum, elite individual defender. Kristaps Porzingis, elite individual defender. That's their starting 5. Al Horford, I don't know if he's elite individual defender now because he is getting older, so it's kind of hard for him to keep up with, younger, faster, quicker, more athletic guys. But at one point, he was an elite defender. So, you got guys all up and down the roster that are pretty elite at playing defense, and so you put it all together and they're an excellent team. No, it's not that way for the Magic, because you've got guys like Paolo, you got guys like Franz, you got guys like Anthony Black that are not elite defenders, but they are good enough to hold their own, and their body type, athleticism, all that stuff, their size, their skills can be switchable. And so regardless of individual skill set, whether they're excellent or not so excellent, this is a team that makes it work across the board with their versatility. So that's their biggest strength, and I don't really see much argument otherwise. Pro number 2 is their youth and their growth potential, both in the locker room and in financial situation as well. I'm going to go over the specifics of the financial situation later, so I will try to avoid numbers, but they are in a pretty decent financial spot, especially when you compare them to a lot of the other really good teams in the NBA. They have a really young roster with a mix of a couple vets. Most of the guys are, either 27 years old or less. A lot of guys that are 25 years old or younger, and then you got a couple of guys thrown in there, Corey Joseph, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Gary Harris, that are in their 30s to kind of provide veteran spark and veteran leadership in that locker room. So this is a really good team that has a halfway decent mix of vets and youth, but it's mostly youth. And so what that means is they have potential to grow both as individual players and playing together. That has been one of the most important things in the Celtics locker room, is those young guys played together for a really long time, and now they have blossomed into excellent players, and you can do the same thing in Orlando. They are one of the few teams that have 2 really young forwards or wings that you can throw out there and each score 20 points or more a night, or can do that in the NBA. Not a lot of other teams can say that they have that luxury. The Orlando Magic have that luxury. And so they can grow as a team together and as individuals. And so that, bodes well for not just the present, but for the future as well. All right, pro number 3 kind of bleeds out from the last one. Financial flexibility with a stable core. So I'm not going to get into the specific numbers, as I said in the last one, in terms of the, the dollar amounts and everything, but let's just put it this way. There are not a lot of big, horrible, bad contracts on this team. And they are in a really, really good financial spot, and at the same time, most, not all, but most of their young players are signed to pretty good contracts for a long time. The only one that's kind of worrisome is Paolo Banchero, who will be a free agent not this upcoming offseason, but the following offseason. He will be a free agent, so he may sign an extension this offseason, but I'm not sure I would do that if I was Paolo because he got injured, so I'm not sure what's going to happen with him, but if they can lock him up like they've locked up Franz, like they locked up Jalen Suggs, like they locked up Jonathan Isaac, like they locked up not locked up Anthony Black, he got drafted, so he's in a long-term contract regardless of what they do. If they can kind of lock up the rest of those guys, then you're going to see a young team that's going to be able to grow together and still have financial flexibility. And because of the fact that they don't have a lot of huge contracts, like, say, the Clippers or like the Celtics or like the Lakers or like the Nuggets or something like that, these guys can add at the trade deadline. They can bring guys in. They can, sign guys that are, on buyout. They can sign anybody they want that gets bought out this year, and they're not going to be penalized because they have the flexibility to do so. They have flexibility this year. They have flexibility in the years to come, and so this is a team that I think can actually continue to improve as the years go along, rather than some of the other teams that we've talked about in these reload, retool, rebuild segments where, yeah, this is kind of their shot, and they don't have a lot of financial flexibility. Okay, moving on to the cons of the Orlando Magic, starting with number one, heavy reliance on one-on-one basketball, leading to offensive inefficiency. So, I kind of labeled it as reliance on 1v1 ball and offensive efficiency, but what I really mean is relying on 1v1 ball causes offensive inefficiency. And that's not the only reason. This team is just not good at shooting, and we're going to get to that a little bit later on, but they play a lot of one-on-one basketball. One of the kind of cons of having the roster that they have and the specific personnel that they have is they do not have a lot of spot-up shooters. That's why I talked so heavily about how I thought Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was a perfect fit for this team. They needed, a guy that was still versatile, that wouldn't give up, versatility on defense, but also brought them better outside shooting and, can create his own shot, but also could just be a spot-up shooter because they don't have a lot of that stuff. And so when you rely on Paolo to, dribble the ball for 17 seconds and get his own shot, then, some days that really works, but some days it doesn't. Same thing with Franz Wagner. Both of those guys have been inefficient throughout their careers, having field goal percentages in the low 40s, having three-point percentages in the low 30s. They are inefficient on offense. And when those two guys are driving the gravy train, then your offense as a whole is going to be inefficient. Jalen Suggs is another guy that when he gets hot, he can get pretty hot. But he's hovering right around that 35% from three, which is not great. That's slightly below average, really. So this is not a team that is going to be very efficient offensively, and it really holds them back from being among the cream of the crop, not only in the East, but in the NBA. If they can get that turned around and they can become more efficient, which it was looking like Paolo was going to do, then this team could be really, really dangerous. If they can shoot and score from all three levels efficiently, there's not going to be a lot of teams that are going to be able to stand up to their personnel. Con number two is lack of experience in big games. Another reason why Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was a good fit, because he's the only one on this roster that has really any experience in big games. Last year was the first time this roster went to the playoffs, and they lost in 7 and they played really well. It was a back and forth series, and every home team won each game. So it is what it is. You came in as the 5 seed, you played the 4 seed, game 7 was on the road, you lost. It is what it is. But because they don't have this experience in big games, they do not know what it's like to go through a grinding playoff run. Now, they had a little bit of experience last year, which is great, but they don't have a lot of experience in terms of getting past the first round of the playoffs. And this is a team that should not be satisfied with that. That's why Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, a guy who has won a championship with the Lakers and a championship with the Nuggets, is a guy that's invaluable to this roster. He is a perfect fit for them on all levels, especially with this one. He is a guy that can kind of guide them. He's a voice that can guide them through this season. At least that was the hope, again, before Paolo got hurt, so we'll see what comes of it. But this is a guy that knows what he's doing. This is a guy that knows what to do, and he has been there and done that. But for the rest of the roster, they just don't know what it's like to play in big games, and that could come back to bite them if you have to play a Milwaukee in the playoffs, or a 76ers in the playoffs, or a New York Knicks, or a Boston Celtics. You have to play any of these teams in the playoffs. It could come back to bite you. And I mentioned this at the top, but the final con that I want to talk about is the lack of outside shooting. Look, they are just not good at shooting threes. Last year, they were bottom 5 in the NBA in terms of efficiency shooting threes, and this year they are also bottom 5 in shooting threes. So this is just not going to be sustainable. The updated statistics as of yesterday, where they are shooting as a team just a shade above 30% from three-point range. That is not going to cut it. I was really hoping with the addition of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and a couple of other additions that they would get better. Now, unfortunately, we don't know how much better they would have been because Paolo's not there, as I've said multiple times. But again, it hasn't happened for them. And if that continues to be a problem in today's NBA, they will not survive because the NBA now is chuck up 40 to 50 threes a game, and whoever makes more is probably going to win the game. And guess what? If you have to get into a shootout, the Orlando Magic are not going to win those. Okay, so taking a look at the financial situation for the Orlando Magic. As compared to the teams that we have already talked about in this series, they are in a significantly better position. You can see they have about $25 million of cap space before they even hit the first apron and about $35 before they hit the second apron. Technically speaking, they are still in the negative in terms of total cap space, but usually that doesn't matter too much, especially if you're just keeping your own players, which is, of course, what the Magic want to do. They are fourth in the NBA in terms of the number of cap space. So the fourth best team is still in the negative, which I find funny. And they are 27th in the league in terms of total payroll. So this is a team that is in one of the better financial situations in the entire NBA. And as you can see, Jonathan Isaac's contract is the one that costs them the most money. And next year, it is going to actually go down to $15 million, as I said at the top of the video. And then you follow that up with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who next year will also make that $22 million a year. But given what he brings and everything that I talked about, I think that's worth it considering they don't really have a lot of money allocated elsewhere. And then Cole Anthony is next at $12.9 million. And, you know, they may try to keep him, they may not. Who knows? And even if they do, he probably won't be making much more than that. I don't anticipate. Maybe he'll make like in the 18 to 20 range, but I think that would be too much personally for Cole Anthony, but I do like what he brings. So if they kept him for this figure, I'm sure they'd be very happy with that. But look at the rest of these contracts. Paolo making 12. Carter Jr. making 12. Franz making 7 this year, but next year his extension kicks in. He's going to be making somewhere around 45 to 50. So that's going to be a huge jump. But other than that, you just don't have a lot of contracts that are hurting you right now. And so, you know, next year, they may be in still a really, really good spot. They're going to obviously be a little bit closer to that first apron with that Franz Wagner contract kicking in, and then whoever they draft, of course, will probably, you know, count towards that. But trades can be made. Who knows what's going to happen? Gary Harris may get traded. That'll save you about $7.5 million off the top. And going from, you know, Franz now to Franz later is about $35 million, I would say. And so, you know, you save, $10 million here. You save another, $7 million with Gary Harris. And really, you're only increasing by $20 million. You're still not at that first apron. So they're in a really, really good spot. They are in, I personally believe, outside of maybe Oklahoma City, the best financial spot in terms of a combination of their talent on the roster and their financial situation in the entire NBA. Alrighty, folks, it is now that time. I will give my doctor's diagnosis as to what I think is going to happen in the Magic and then what I think they should do in the offseason. I think the Orlando Magic will win 40 games this season, even without Paolo Banchero. I think that they will make the play-in tournament in the East, and they will win the play-in tournament in the East, or they will just be the 8th seed. Either way, they will make the playoffs. They will lose in the first round of the playoffs to either the Boston Celtics or the New York Knicks. And, of course, my doctor's diagnosis of what the Orlando Magic should do this offseason is reload. It is our first reload of the series, and this one is honestly a pretty easy call for me. This was a team that I think could have been a top 3 team in the East had they stayed healthy, had they improved the shooting, had they gotten where they needed to go. Unfortunately, the season's kind of been cut out from under them. Without Paolo, this team is not going to compete in the East, especially against the top dogs. But their financial situation, the fact that they still are going to get Paolo back next year, and they still have financial, flexibility to add more pieces. They still have some decent draft capital, and they are already a really good team, but because they're so young, they can continue to improve. This is an easy call. You bring back the core next year, you keep it exactly the same, you change out a couple of pieces, and you fire your best shot in 2025 to 2026. So, what do you guys think about my diagnosis? Do you agree? Do you think that the Orlando Magic should reload, or do you think that they should retool? I'd be pretty surprised if anybody thinks they should rebuild at this point, but who knows? Maybe you do. If so, let me know. But, do you think that they should retool? You think that they should, maybe trade Franz for a different second star? Do you think they should trade Jalen Suggs or Jonathan Isaac or any of these other guys? Do you think they should get rid of Wendell Carter and replace him with somebody else? What do you think the Orlando Magic should do? Let me know down in the comments section below with your thoughts.